Good afternoon, everyone. I want to make an admission right off the bat that when I was asked to do this, I was a bit hesitant about doing that. And the reason is HLS thinks big. And that title, quite frankly, is pretty intimidating. So I thought to myself, what is it about the nature of the work that I do that's so big that it's going to change the world because it's innovative, it's trailblazing, it's unique, and quite frankly, nothing. Okay, so I decided to change my thinking a little bit. It's not necessarily the big things that are going to change the world so much, but rather the seemingly small, insignificant, and little things. So this way of thinking actually aligns a lot with the way in which I teach my students in the transactional law clinics. That it's not necessarily the big picture that you necessarily will focus on all the time. Sure, keep your eye on where the deal is and where you want it to wind up. But don't let the big picture obscure your vision of the little things. In fact, every deal has so many micro transactions within it, so many small component parts to the deal. It's similar to individual pixels on a TV screen. It's the little things that determine if the big things will actually happen. So a deal can actually turn on the language of one word, one punctuation mark, one tweak to the timing, one change of the process. One of my interests for some time now has been how do we make the lives of people better as a society. And so before coming to Harvard, I worked in state government at the Office of Minority and Women Business Assistants. And one of my first assignments there when I got there was to rewrite the regulations about who would qualify for the program. And this was in the early 1990s. And at the time, there was a $14 billion highway construction project going on, known as the Big Dig. So, with the change of a word here or there, I would determine who would qualify for lucrative construction projects. When I came to Harvard about 20 years ago, my first position was as a clinical instructor in the Hale and Dorr Legal Services Center's Community Enterprise Project. And our mission at the time was to provide legal services to community-based entrepreneurs and organizations who otherwise might not have access to pro bono legal services or low-cost legal services. So over the years, I've thought a lot about why it is that we don't see transformations in communities, except when there's gentrification. Because I've been doing transactional law for so many years, I see things through the eyes of a transactional lawyer. So when I look at laws and regulations, what I see are transactional deal points. In every transaction involving private parties, there's also an additional party there. And that additional party is we, the public, we, society. The public's deal points in every transaction are the laws and regulations that exist, whether it's a transaction involving a lease, an employment agreement, financing agreement. These are the laws that relate to private party transactions, but the public is always there. For example, when a business wants to locate itself at a particular location, there are zoning laws. When a business wants to hire personnel, they have to consider the employment laws, the independent contractor laws, or whether this person might qualify for an internship. If somebody wants to form a new entity, they have to conform to the existing entity structures and pay a filing fee for the privilege to exist. When an asset is to be transferred, we have to look at whether it's a taxable transaction or not. When the business wants to sell an interest to someone, we have to look at the securities laws. So none of these transactions can legitimately be accomplished without reference to the law and regulations. It's as if we, the public, have a seat at every deal table. We, the public, control process, control cost, control risk, control even deal breakers. So one way to facilitate economic development in low opportunity communities is to affect, as much as we can, the deal to make them less expensive, to make the approval process a lot more quick, so that entrepreneurial activity actually can breathe. So a one-size-fits-all approach may not clog up the gears of business for big business, but certainly they do have an effect on small businesses. Now, it's interesting, when a city wants to attract a big business, it can offer tax breaks, it can offer infrastructure improvements, it can tweak the transaction, tailor the circumstances to facilitate the deal's bottom line. So when it matters to the public, it can be done. And there's no transactional legal reason why the same approach could not be applied to underdeveloped neighborhoods. So as a transactional lawyer, I can make a deal easier, harder, more expensive, less expensive, just by the language that I choose. The same power exists for the public. We're a third party in every transaction. So if we want to make deals within communities less expensive, the process faster, we can take an affirmative, intentional approach to doing that. We can accelerate business activity, we can lower barriers to entry, we can improve sustainability. So for businesses that don't have a lot of startup capital, which is the case when we're talking about businesses that typically want to go into low opportunity communities, it's these little things like reducing cost, like speeding up approval times that can facilitate development. We could even extend our community engineering one step further. When my son was in middle school, he had a math assignment. And his math assignment was to look at ratios and pick any subjects that he wanted to pick. So I was his dad, he was a kid. I made a suggestion to look at the various storefront operations along a street that we lived in the neighborhood that we lived in at the time, and to look at the storefront operations that were there. So he recorded all the storefronts along the street: hair salons, barber shops, sub shops, pizza shops, convenience stores, liquor stores, churches, hardware stores. And the ratios of the establishments didn't tell a good story. The ratio of liquor stores, for example, to other kinds of establishments was relatively too high, and certainly too high for a community in need of development. So, if the will of the public is to facilitate economic development in the places where it's needed, then we, the public, as a third party in every deal, can do that. We control process, we control overall deal cost, we can control who a business can afford to hire and not to hire. So while we often focus on the big picture of what we want to see, let's not overlook that transactional deal points are embedded in every regulation. And it's not as if they're fixed in stone, because we, the public, can rewrite regulations and make their application malleable to fit the circumstances of a particular community. And it's these transactional deal points, these little things, that can either impede development or can facilitate development. Thank you.